Hey everyone, in this one we're going to be having a look at Toddle components versus Bubbles reusables, and there are some fundamental differences. So just for the purpose of this video, what I will do is I'll just refer to them as components, even though I know in Bubble they're actually reusables rather than components. So just for those who are not familiar with components, even though you might have worked with reusables, I just want to go through sort of how components traditionally have worked and how they actually do work in Toddle, which we'll go into in a little bit, and where Bubbles reusables fall down a little bit in terms of making them full components that actually would be much easier to work with. So let's get a bit abstract for a second, okay? So what is a component? So let's look at a component as a box, okay? And that box in a web app lives within a page. Now it could also live within another component, but for this example, for argument's sake, let's say it's the page. So we've got a component inside a page. Now a component can be anything. It could be like a menu or whatever. So just so it's not completely abstract, let's just take a look at this. So this is my navigation bar in my Bubble app. This is a reusable, or let's say a component, and it lives within the page. Okay, and so that is a component or a reusable as Bubble knows it. So there's two key parts to a component that really makes it work within the context of an application. And that is that the container needs to be able to communicate inwards. It needs to send information about how the component is meant to behave, how it's meant to look, all of these types of things. So these are generally called properties. So these are like the information that goes into it. And a good example is, let's say for example here I've got this, each option on the navigation bar's got an icon at the top and underneath it a label. So let's say that I actually wanted this navigation bar for whatever reason to display differently. So I wanted to, let's say, rather than have them vertically, I wanted to have them horizontally, so left and right, the icon on the left, the label on the right. Then I could set up a property on the component, the reusable in Bubbles case, and be able to say I want you to display it vertically or horizontally. That's a good example. So the idea then is that components can be not only reusable throughout the application but also customizable. Now if they're too customizable, if they're too different, too configurable, then you'll probably have two components. Whether a difference is only slight differences, then you wouldn't have two components, you'd have one and you'd make that configurable. And the way to do that is to tell the component how to act, how to look, how to be configured using properties, or in web component parlance we would call them attributes. So in traditional components, I've been at this a long time, so they used to be called properties. In web components we tend to call them attributes, and that's getting data into the component. Now obviously we need to get data out of the component and into its container, in this case the page, because something may happen in the component which the page needs to know about. So a simple example here is that somebody clicks an option in the nav bar. The page needs to know what's happened because the component itself is completely self-contained, so it has no context of itself within the application itself. Okay, in the same way as the page, its container, has no idea of what the implementation details of the component. It has no idea what it's actually doing within itself. It kind of leaves that job to the component, and that's the beauty of components basically, is that each one is its own self-contained unit, but you fit them all together and they work as an application. And again, they work as data in and data out. So what we need to do then is to find a way that when something happens in a component, for example somebody clicks an option in the nav bar, that its container, in this case a page, knows about it. And these are what we call events. So this is data out. Okay, so that's kind of the anatomy of a component from a very high level abstract view. Toddle implements this perfectly, and I've not seen another no-code tool, although some talk about it, implement that component structure. And people might correct me, there might be other ones out there, certainly not from what I've seen, that implements that component structure absolutely according to web standards, web components. Okay, and that's why I'm really excited about Toddle's component model, because it is absolutely fantastic. So, okay, what about Bubble's reusables? Does that implement that? And okay, Bubble doesn't try to call them components, they're called reusables. But basically, you don't have properties to get data in, and you don't have events to get data out. So effectively, your reusable is sat on a page, floating on its own, if you like. Okay, it's sort of stranded, if you like. Okay, now obviously there are workarounds to that, otherwise they'd be completely useless, and we can make it work like a component, but it can get quite hacky, to be honest. And we're used to using it because Bubble's great, of course it is, and you learn to work with its limitations, its workarounds. Okay, so if you're used to working with reusables in Bubble, properties it doesn't have, but what you can have is custom states, which generally would call variables in Toddle, but you can have custom states on the actual reusable itself, the top level of the reusable. And what those do, those custom states, is they are available to its container, to, in this case, the page. So let's have a look here on the navigation bar. We've got quite a few custom states that we can set externally, and one of these is action. Okay, but also you look like we can sort of we've got other things. Is it expanded? Is it transparent, etc.? So all of these things are going to determine behavior, just like I was saying before, but they're not properties, they're custom states. Okay, you can set a default value overall for the actual reusable, but on each instance that you drop on your app of that reusable, you can't set them at design time. So for example, if we look at our icon element here, which is an iconify element, we can set all of these properties at design time, how it's going to work, what it's going to look like, etc., etc. Okay, if you look at a reusable on our page, let's say our navbar reusable, we don't get anything. There is nothing exposed to us at design time. So what tends to happen is we then tend to have to set those at runtime. It starts to get a little bit hacky, but it's doable. It's not a big deal. We can deal with it, and the way that we tend to deal with it is we would generally have something. Sorry, I'm on the wrong one there. I need to be on. Yeah, there we go. So generally, you will have something that will initialize it to set those values up, and you could pass parameters in to deal with that. So for example, let's just have a look at a reusable that I've got, which is just like a data drop down. So it's just a custom drop down that I've developed, and it's fairly customizable. So what I have in here is a workflow that's called initialize, and then the idea then is that the container runs the initialize workflow at runtime and then sets its properties here as parameters on the workflow, and then I set them on the custom states within the reusable itself. It works, but it's not really how a component's supposed to work. Okay, so it's a bit hacky. However, that is fairly straightforward, that workaround. That's not really a big deal. Where the real workaround and the real hassle comes with components or reusables in Bubble is actually getting data out of the event. So for example, I've got a reusable here that's like a little toolbar with 3 buttons on it, 3 icons, and they can click it. Okay, and then obviously what's going to happen there is its container needs to know which one was clicked. How are we going to tell it that? We have no events, we have no built-in event mechanism to deal with this. So how do we deal with it in Bubble? I mean, we have this workaround generally that people use, and that I use, that we all have to use if we're using reusables to any extent, and that is that we've got a custom state sat on the top level. I've got one called action, and then on the page itself, what's happening there is on the actual page itself, we have things like this here, a do when the condition is true event, which is watching for a particular reusable element's custom state to change. So in other words, it's like listening for that. Okay, so what we're effectively doing is changing a state on the reusable, and then having a listener for that. So That's great. That communication can, it's not great actually, but we can make it work doing that if that we've just got one component deep. So we've got a component on a page, for example. What if we've got 2 or 3 or 4 components deep, which if you're really going to componentize out your app, which you should do because that's how we can separate our application out and just work on one small thing at a time. How we're going to deal with that, because then we've got to do is to tell this component to listen to something on that component and that on this, all the way up to the page for something to happen at the page level. That's going to be really tricky. So what people do, some people use JavaScript. I use a plugin called Satellite. So on our toolbar example, what we have to have is we basically just call into the satellite to say, go and pass some data to anything that might be listening for this type of data, in this case like a sidebar action, and then on the page have something that's then going to listen for this and then respond to it and do what it needs to do. Okay, again, the satellite plugin is great. It deals with it. It really helps us to handle communication between reusables or components, and also where we've got embedded components, and it works, but it's not native to Bubble. It's a workaround. It's a little bit of a hack. Yeah, the other thing as well is when we're sending data, we can only send basic data type. We can only send text and numbers and yes, no's or booleans. We can't send data type values, so like a type of customer or whatever. In fact, in this case, I can't even set an option set option. I have to kind of just send its display a text value for its display attribute, and then reconstitute it at the page level to get that option back. So there are limitations with that as well. But we can make it work. We do make it work. Let's be honest. So that is what you would do in Bubble, and it's a really long-winded way to do it compared to what Toddle has got. So I'm just going to show you a couple of things here. Now I'm going to build this out in Toddle so that you've got a better idea of how Toddle works, but I'm just sort of comparing and contrasting between the two to really hopefully hit home just how good Toddle's component system is. So you remember in a previous video I made this list here. It pulls data down from an API living on Xano, and we've got this, we put like the contact name and email address and the company name, and if we just run this in run mode, you can click on it and so on and so forth and all that type of thing. Okay, but this is new, this username here. So we've got like a little image, or if they haven't got an image, we've got like a little label and then the name of the user. And also if you mouse over it, you get like a little menu, so you can edit that, or you can view or whatever you want to do in there as well. So now this is a component, so it's actually a component within a component, but at the page level, this is a component. Okay, it's not sat directly on the all of the implementation details are not set directly on the page, and so I can reuse that, like a user kind of avatar type thing. I can use that anywhere in the application and not just in this particular list. So let's go back into edit mode and let's have a look at how this works. So basically I've got it on the page here, and we'll go through, if you stick with me in this, we'll go through how we built this. I'll build it from scratch. And this is our component here. So what is good about that is that we have two options. We have attributes and we have events. Do you remember, attributes is how you get data in to the component, and events are how we're going to get information back out of that component. Okay, so and we can set these at design time. Okay, the component exposes these to us and we can get at them here, so we can set default values. So we can actually pass in a full user record, okay, so that the component itself has got the information it needs to display. And then we've got things like, let's say, show name. So in other words, if we don't want this to show, then all we've got to do is show name show name, all we simply got to do is set that to false. Okay, and if you look there, the name no longer shows. Okay, if you look, we create a menu when you hover over it. Okay, we can also set an attribute that says actually in this instance of this particular component, in this part of the app or whatever, I don't actually want the menu. So what I can do there is set that to false as well. And so when we run that, then there is no menu anymore. Okay. So attributes are old school properties, what we used to call properties in components, and you can set them at design time, you can set them at runtime, but you can set them up exactly how you want this component to behave, okay, and it exposes those. And then we've got events, which are really key in this. So essentially, when I'm looking at this component, I've got the events and I've got clicked. That means that this component has exposed a click event to me, okay, to the page, and this is how it's going to get data out of there. Okay, so if I click on that, then what I've got, I'm responding to that event, and so what I've got here is that I'm going to set the option that was clicked. So let's say they're on the menu and they did actually click an option, it's going to tell me that, and also it's going to tell me which ID was actually passed back. And so the component is going to basically expose a click event, and in that click event it's going to tell me which option was clicked if they clicked on the menu, and also which ID, which user ID it was dealing with. So what we'll do then is just have a look at the component itself. So the way to do that is we click on here, we go to components, and then user info. Okay, so it's very simple component. And so what's going to happen then is that when the div is clicked here, what we're going to do is that we're going to say, well, right, well, the div clicked has its own click event. What I can then do is say trigger clicked, and then I can pass some information that it expects back to the page, okay, which completely follows the convention of components, which is properties are attributes to get data in from the container, events to get information out of the component back to the container. So Toddle implements this absolutely perfectly. So let's go and build that from scratch now. What we need to do then is we'll go up here and we will go to components and we will say new. I'll leave the ones that we've got in place, they're just not on the page at the minute, so we will add that one. And let's just call this demo, for example, and I'll call this user info. So this is just part of how Toddle asks you to name your components, which is similar to how web components work. So you've got a prefix and then you've got the name. Okay, so we're going to create this. Okay, so what this needs to do then is, from our previous one, is it's going to display the user that's assigned to a lead. So we don't necessarily know where the user data is coming from, we just know that it's coming from somewhere. And what we need to do then is to force the container that's going to be using this component to supply the data for each instance of this component. So what we can do then is we go to data and let's start setting up our attributes. Now, as we discussed previously, attributes are how the container communicates with the component. So in other words, we need to give, if you like, the little endpoints, the little antennas, if you like, of information that we're going to need to, whether compulsory or optional, to make this component function. So the first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need the actual user data so that we can get at that. Now, we're not going to call an API from inside this. We're going to expect that the container has got that data and it's going to pass it into us. Okay, now we need to sort of tell it what the shape of that is going to look like. Okay, so let's just go back into our page. So the way that we do that is we can go here and then pages and then home page. Rather than do that, what I'll do, I'll open this other tab up with our page. Okay, and then we can work between the two. Okay, so if we look at in our data with our API, with our leads, this gives us an idea of the data that we're going to get back here. So let's have a look at this first one. If we scroll down, we have assigned user. So basically, in our list of So let me close that. In our list of leads, each lead has an assigned user, and that's the one that we're going to display next to the lead. So what we're going to do then is, back in here, let's just scroll down and find the assigned user. Here we go. And so what we can do is just copy that, the assigned user, go back to our component, and go back to our new component, and in our attributes, what we're doing here really is just giving it the shape of the user. So it's not any user data specifically, but we've got to tell it what kind of object that we're going to be looking at. So for example, it's giving us here that we're going to get an ID, we're going to get an email address, we're going to get an image, various different pieces of information, some that we'll use, some that we won't. Okay, so if we go back in there again, actually it's going to shape it for us nicely, so we can see that we're going to get that we can expect to get this type of data in here. So we're just setting up test data at the minute, but it's important to set it up when you're setting up data in objects like that, so that the component, the attribute, knows what type of data it's going to expect. Okay, and so that's our user data. That's an attribute that's going to have our user data on there. And what we also want to do is to give the page or the component, whatever, that's actually consuming our component, we want it to have the option to say, well, do you want to display the name, the full name of the user on the component? Because generally speaking, you may only want to display the image or whatever you want to do. So what we'll do is we will just create one called show name. So I'm just going to set that to true in there now. So at the minute we can sort of leave it like that, because they're the two attributes that the page can set on the component. Is you need to tell us what the user is, and you need to tell us whether you want to show the name or not. Okay, so that's kind of data in, that's what we're dealing with. So the component itself, what we want it to do is effectively is to display like the avatar of the user, which is generally the image. But if they don't have an image, then we want to display maybe their initials inside like a group. So let's go to elements here. So what we'll do, it's generally good practice just to have a div around the whole thing that you can use to, if you like, organize everything within that. So like a header div. In Bubble, that's like a group. So we're going to go to there, and in our new one, it's obviously going to be a row container because we're doing left to right. Okay, it's not a column container top to bottom. So we'll say it's a row container. And then what we will do is we also now want a div that's going to contain our image and maybe our little tag if there isn't an image. So let's create another div. Okay, and then that's going to be like our container. So again, that's going to be a row container. We can set things up later on. Let's get the general frame of it going now. And so this is kind of like the div that's going to, the group if you like, that's going to contain all of the component. This is just going to contain either an image or like the tag in there, so we can put them both under the same thing. So now we need another div. Again, these are like setting up groups in Bubble. And now we want that to actually live inside that div, so let's just push it in there. And what we actually want to live in that div is an image. Okay, and then what we want is another div inside this one, so at the same level as this one, another group, div. Okay, and then inside that we just want a text inside that. So we need to click on that one. There we go, and then we can put a text in there. Okay. So with the image, what we want to do is to get the image on the user information that we've got. So if we click on this and we go into there, let's just set the size of it. We'll set the size of it on the div. We only want it to, let's say be 32 pixels by 32 pixels, for example. Okay, and what we want to do on the image then, we need to set where the image is coming from. So we go to attributes, and this works just like HTML images, that we've got a source, our src. Okay, and then obviously this needs to be dynamic because we're going to grab it from the user data that's been passed in to us. So what you can do then is click on this, and where we're going to grab that from is, again, the attribute, the user that's been passed in by the page or the container. And what we're going to need to do then is look for the image, which is an image file. Okay, and that's going to display in there. Okay, now what if the user doesn't have an image file? Okay, then we don't want to display that. So what we can do on here on the div is we can put a show formula on there, which you can do by right clicking and go show hide, or also under attribute here you can go to show. Okay, so what this is doing is to say that you need a true or false outcome, like a condition to say, is it shown or isn't it shown? So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to grab our attribute, which contains our user data, get the image, and now what I want to do is I want to say, is it not empty? Okay, so the way to do that is there's a function called not equal to. Okay, and then the second parameter, what I tend to do in Toddle, because there's no specific way to test against something that's blank, you know, I can't say user image not equal and another step that says blank. Okay, so what I tend to do, and at the minute you can't actually have global variables in Toddle, so you have to set them up per page or per component or whatever. So what I'll do, I'll go to variables and I will just set up a variable called blank, and obviously it's a blank string that I'm sort of looking for, so I'm going to close, make sure that's there. Okay, and then that's there available for me in that condition. So again, I'm just going to right click and go show hide, and then so what I'm saying is not equal, he's saying you get two values, compare the two. If they're not equal, then you do get a true value. If they are equal, you get a false value. So if it's not equal to blank, if the image is not equal to blank, which means that there is a value, there is an image file it's pointing at, then I want that to return true. If it's blank, I want it to return false. So I'm going to just check for that. So at the minute, so is the field, so that's exactly what I want, because there wasn't, in the test data that I've put in there at the minute, in our user attribute, there isn't an image file for this particular user. So that's exactly the result that I want, in that this div, which is to show the image, should not be shown if there isn't an image specified. So that's the result that I want. Okay, so with this one then, the opposite is true. Okay, so what we can do with this one, this is just going to display like the initials of the user. So if there's no image, then we want it to display like a tag that's just got their initial in there as well. So again, we can do a similar sort of thing, right click, show hide, and it's going to be the same thing in here as it can be user image, but this time we're just going to say is it equal to. Another formula in there, equals, and then we're going to, so that's the first value that we're going to test equals to, and the second value again is blank. So if the user's image equals blank, then it's going to return true, which means we're going to show this. So if there's no image, we're just going to show a text as well. Okay, so what we want on there when we're showing that particular text is we want to style it a little bit. We're going to want it to be round. So what we'll do is we'll set the under border, we'll set radius, and we'll just set that, what did we say, it's going to be sort of 32. So let's set it to 20 pixels. I don't think I've actually set the size of this one. No, I've not. So let's set it to the same size as the image, because it's either going to be one or the other basically. Okay, so we'll set the outline, and the style is going to be just solid. We don't actually need, yeah, okay, and we'll just set that to be fairly bright, and that's it, that's what we wanted. Okay, and we've set the background color, that will do, maybe a little bit lighter than that, that's okay. Now the text color, what we need there. And remember, in Toddle you don't set the text font and size and everything. You don't set them on the actual text. You set them on the div, on the container that it belongs to. So text. So let's say the size is going to be 12px. Might be a bit small, but we'll see. Let's set the weight then and make that bold. Okay. We want it to be centered within itself. That's it. And let's say that we want the text color to be the same color as the border. So it's, yeah, okay. Okay, so that's what we want it to look like in terms of the style of it. The same applies up here as well, as we want an outline around the image that is going to, yeah, solid, and the color is going to be that one. Okay, so it's got an outline. The border, we need to set the radius again on the image div, which is, we'll just set it to 20 pixels. As long as you set the radius, same in bubble, as long as you set that to more than half of the size of it, then it will make it fully round. Okay, so we've done that. So what we need to do then, we've set the source of the image based upon the formula, so we need to do something similar here for the text. So if we go to the text element, and under text we click the formula. Now what we need to do with this one is we just want to put the initials in there, so we need to take the first letter of the first name and the first letter of the last name. So what we can do then is, again, we take it from the user data. We've got the name first, the first name. Okay, and then what we need to do is just grab the first letter off that, and Toddle has a formula called take for that one. Okay, and we just want to get the array that it asks for is just a string. Okay, and we just want the first character, so you can see it's got us R. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to concatenate that. Okay, to do the same thing, so we're going to do that, and then we're going to add a new one, and quite handily it copies that for us. So with this one, we just really want to just get the last name instead. So we just want to get the last name, and so we get this effect. Okay, so we're just getting the first name, taking the first character off it, then we're going to concatenate it with the last name and set the first character off that to get us the initials of the user in there as well, and then we can see this. So pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, so at the minute, yeah, we've pretty much got a basic component in place here, to be honest. So if we were to go into our page, so where we want this is kind of right at the bottom here. So this is our name paragraph here. Just let me check. So this, yeah, okay, so we want it under there, so we want a new paragraph really, or let's see if we can just drop it in. So let's just put it there, inside there, and then we can just do a search for it, user info. So it's this one, demo user info, that we want. Okay, and it's popped it there. Okay, now what we're not doing, the reason we're not seeing any data in there, because remember, it's not like Bubble in Toddle, you see live data essentially even in edit mode. The reason we're not seeing anything at the minute is, remember, that that component is relying on our user attribute, and we're not actually passing that in yet. So let's do that now. So in our page, what we can do then on here, when we click on the component we've added, we get the attributes that we've set up. So it's asking us for, do we want to show the name? So let's say, best way to set this is to go to the formula, add it, and then just to say, let's say we want true. Okay, we haven't even added that in there, so it doesn't matter, it won't even show it at the minute anyway. But the most important thing is to get the user in there. So let's go and set up a formula to get that. So what we can do then is the item, which is a lead, it's not a user, remember. So the item is the current cell in Bubble. So we select that, and then we're going to scroll all the way down through our lead information that we get back from Xano, and we've got our assigned user, and right away we get our user information. Now obviously that's not too good at the minute, the image. Okay, so let's go back and fix that. So if we go to our image, I think it's the image we need to make round as well. So if we just say, so the radius is only set to 20 pixels, so that should probably do it for us. Let's just check it. Now with Toddle, because we're working on the component here, and then we're going to be working on a page here, most of the time we'll just have to refresh it in edit mode. It's fine in run mode, but in edit mode, just to see the change reflected, just refresh the editor for the page that we're working with. So I think that looks pretty good. This one doesn't have any user assigned, so that's why we're not seeing any information here. So let's go into test mode and make sure that everything's okay. Yeah, so there's our kind of user avatar done, right, for now, as a basic thing. So what we want to do now is we're going to now add the name of the user in there, and then we're going to implement the attribute to determine whether that name is going to get shown or not. So what we will do then, again, these two here I've put all in their own div. They've got, each one's got its own div, but it's got a container div, so I don't want to get involved in that. I'm going to add it into this one. Okay, so I'm going to add this time I'm going to add a paragraph. Okay, and on the text, what I want, let's just set this up. So what you can do, by the way, if you're missing out any alignment on a paragraph, I said in one of my previous videos, because I hadn't really got into Toddle too much at that point, and I'm still learning. But at the time I sort of didn't really realize that what you can do is edit this layout thing here. So what you can do, I can say that I want to display, and it gives me the option for flex, and then I can pick this type of thing, so I can do all of that. So I can easily just say I want that centered horizontally and vertically. I don't suppose the horizontal really matters. I'm probably going to put some gap spacing on there, just let's say 6 pixels, so there's a little bit of a gap, maybe a bit more. Let's make it 8. Okay, similarly to what you do in Bubble, you know, where we have gap spacing in Bubble, and we have, you know, the column and the rows for groups. So okay, so there's a paragraph. So what we can do there is then we're going to display the username. So again, we come to the text, click the formula, and we're going to grab it from the user, which is data that's been passed in, and we're going to say that we want the user's first name, and we're going to use our old friend concatenate. Okay, and we're just going to add a couple in there. We don't need the middle one because that's just for a space. Okay, and then this one needs to be the last name, not the first name. Yeah, okay, and so we get the user's name in there. Okay, maybe make this a little bit smaller in terms of the text size. Now that's actually gone into rem, because obviously you've got different measurements of font in web development. They've gone for 0.75 rem. Let's go in this case for, let's say, 11 pixels. Okay, and then that's good. Okay, so now we can look at implementing the attribute that we've set up and that the container can determine. So in here then we've got the attribute show name. Now we've set it true by default, so that means that it will be true. It will always show it unless the container actually specifies what's going on. So what we can do then here is simply on our paragraph is set up a show hide, and all we want to do is to say it's only visible if the show name attribute is true. So all we need to do then is go to our attribute show name. Okay, and that's all we need to do there. Okay, so if the container has set the show name attribute to false, we won't see that. Okay, so let's just have a look. Let's refresh. There we go, we're showing it by default. Okay, if we go into edit mode to our component and we change this to, the best way to do it is just to click on the formula and set it to false in there. Okay, and then we can see it's disappeared. So you can see that how attributes are so useful in terms of just being able to set things. You can set it on the component to things that you want to be configurable, and then the container can then determine what's going on as well. Okay, so we can see sort of what's going on with this one. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's say that within the component the user, let's say, clicks on any element of the component, okay, what do we want to pass back? So, and again, this, so far we dealt with attributes, which is getting information into the component. How can we get information out of the component? And we've already discussed that we do that with events. So what we need to do then is to set up an event on the component that the container can listen to. So let's go into data, and we've got our events here. So let's just set up an event called click. Okay, and what it's looking for with this is what type of data, what is the shape of data that click event is going to pass back to us. Okay, so let's say that it's going to pass back two things. Okay, one is the ID of the user that's actually been clicked on. Okay, because don't forget, in a repeating group or in a repeating element like we've got in Toddle, we need to know which ID has actually been clicked on, because we may not necessarily know that. We just get an event telling us that a user has been clicked. We need to know which one. When we need to get multiple pieces of data back that are different types of data, we generally just create an object, and we can do that very easily here. So remember, don't get confused by this. Curly braces just means it's just to wrap up an object. So all that we need to do there is to say, okay, the ID of the user. Okay, and you know, we can just pop that in there, comma to separate it out, and we can say let's say task that's clicked. Okay, so do you remember before in when I was showing you the one that I've already developed, we have the facility have like a pop-up menu, and then they can select that. Okay, so at the minute, let's say that the ID is 0 and the task is blank by default, and then it just tells you the shape of the information that's going to get returned back. Okay, so when in the element they click on, because this div is going to contain everything, so let's say that when they click on this div, when they click on it, we then want to send that information back up to the container to say, hey, this is clicked and here's the information that we want you to know about. And so what we can do then is the div itself has a click event, so the user clicks, we get this click event. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to trigger our own click event that we've just created. So in other words, by saying trigger this click event, then the container's click event will get triggered, and then the container can deal with it as it needs to deal with it. So what we can do with this one, so we get this sort of default data, but let's just blank this out. Okay, and what we will do is we will just go into here. And what we're going to do, we're going to set up an object. Okay, and what we can do there is just to add some things in there. So let's just add a couple in there. So the first one, as we just said there, was going to be ID. Okay, and then what's the value of that? Okay, so we need to input the value. We need to specify where that's coming from. So where that's coming from basically is the user's ID. Okay, so we can therefore create this object that's going to say that this user that's been clicked on is this one. This is the ID of that user. Okay, and the second one was what we call task, and with this one we're just going to leave it blank because there is no task, it's just a straight click. And by leaving it blank, we can tell the container that that's exactly what it is. There's nothing for it to do. We're not telling it to go and do a task that the user asked us to do. We're just simply saying they've just clicked on it, and this is the user that's been clicked on. And so if we have a look at the output, that's what's going to get returned. We actually don't need to put that in there, I don't think. Yeah, it's just put it there itself. Okay, great stuff. So then let's just do that. Okay, so that's what we need to do from the component side. So back in the page now, let's say that we want something to happen when they click. So what I will do is I will just simply put like another label at the side of it, and then the user that gets clicked, any lead that represents that will just get a label shown at the side of it, just to prove that it works. Okay, so we're going to add an element, and we will put a paragraph in there. Okay, and we don't want it inside the, you can see how that's inside the the actual component, we don't want that. So what we need to do then is we want it underneath it. So actually, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just delete that one. Click on the container, which I think is that one. Yes, it is. And I'll add an element, and I'll just put the paragraph in there. That puts it to the bottom nicely. Okay, that's fine. We won't bother styling it. Okay, so what is the content that we want to display? So I'm just going to simply display clicked. Okay, and what we need to do then is to say, okay, well, when are we going to show that? And what we want to do is to say that this only displayed for the records that have the user that's been clicked. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So what we need to do then is to respond to the event from the component that it has been clicked. So what we do, go to the component and we go over to events, and there's our event. So all we've got to do is put a handler, a listener, whatever, onto that event there. And then what we need to do is to say, okay, let's get that data and use it. So before we can use it, we need to store it somewhere once it arrives at the page. So we're going to have a variable for that. And I think we already got one on there. Let me see. No, so let's say it's let's call selected user ID. Okay, and we'll just set that to 0 for now. Okay, and then we'll be able to use that. So in our elements, going back here, going back to our click event, what we can do now then is to say, okay, we're going to set the variable selected user ID, and then we can see what we get back. We're getting the ID back and we're getting the task. So it's the ID we're interested in. So let's go into formula, and we're just going to say it's the event and it's the ID. So that's going to then pass that in, and it's going to assign it into that one there. So once we've got that data back from the component, we've now stored it in a variable on the page. We can now use it to determine whether this should be displayed next to each lead or not. So in here we can just go into we can just go into show hide, and all we need to do there is to say that the item, which again is like current cell, which remember this is a list of leads, not users. So we need to go and find the user, which is assigned user, and the ID. Okay, and then we can say is equal to, and then we need to say the variable that we've just got back from the event, which is selected user ID. Okay, and at the minute it's set to false, so let's just see if this works. Okay, let's go into test mode. So if I click on this one, okay, we can see then that it's got returned the ID of the user that we clicked on, and everything that's assigned to every record that's assigned to that user has got clicked by it. And then we can do this and we can do that. There's only one of those, obviously. Okay, but the point is that this is how we're getting data back from the component really easy, just using events. Okay, so let's go back into edit mode. Now we have a pop-up menu that goes over that. Now I think we're running a bit too long to go through and rebuild that menu that was done there, but let's just implement it inside of our actual component for now. So go back to our component. We're going to add an element, and we're just going to say it's the data options menu. Okay, so when the user mouses over this div, which contains everything, so when they hover over the component, we need to do something to tell it to show this menu. Okay, so luckily Toddle gives us lots of events, so we have some mouse events, and we have mouse enter and mouse leave. So when they hover over it, mouse enter gets triggered. When they leave it, mouse leave gets triggered. So what we can do then is to say when they enter it, display that menu. Okay, but that menu needs to know something about when it's going to get displayed or not. So what we will do is we will set up a variable in here. Okay, so like variables are like private pieces of information that get used internally within the component. Attributes are public information that it exposes to its container for it to set. So I'm going to set a variable here, and I'm going to call this show menu, and it's just going to be it's got to be false. So what I'll do, I'll set it in a formula first by just using this false. Okay, and yeah, that's fine. So now we can use this. So if we go back to elements, and back to events, and when they mouse enter, then what we can do is simply to set the show menu. Okay, and we're just going to set it to true. Okay, and then when they leave, then we can do the opposite, which is set the show menu to false. Okay, and so what we can do then is on our component, the menu component, is we can then set a show hide on it, and we can simply say that the variable show menu, okay, if show menu is true, show it. If it's false, then don't show it. Okay, and so what we can do then is just give that a go on here again, just refresh it. Nope, so we need to be in run mode, of course. Okay, so we're getting something here. Okay, we're just getting like a little thing, we're not seeing any options. Okay, let's go and check on that. The reason for that is that we have, again, on our component, we have attributes, and this is saying basically is, do you want to have the add option, do you want to have the edit option, do you want to have the view option, do you want to have the delete option? Again, configurable. So what we can do for all of that is just simply say, yes please, we will have all of these, thank you very much. If they're free, I will have 10 of them. Okay, and yeah, true. Okay, so now we're saying, yep, give us all those buttons, the add, the edit, the view, and the delete. Okay, so then when we refresh this, notice I'm using test mode rather than preview mode, but anyway, so there we go, great stuff. And then we've got our menu here. Okay, and yeah, that all looks good for now. Okay, now what we had in the other one was a facility where our top level component here, our main user info component, where we can say, actually, you know what, if we want an attribute to say that the container can determine if that menu is going to be visible or not. So what we can do then in our data, we can add another attribute, and we can then say that this one is going to be called show menu, not to be mixed up with the show menu variable. And let's say as a default, let's say that that's going to be true. Okay, so then if we run that again, no, we've not implemented it yet, have we? We need to implement it on here. So we've already got like a show condition, so let's just have a look at that one that says that when the show menu is true, then it's false, otherwise. Now that's an internal variable depending on whether the user's hovered over it or not. But now what we also need to do is to put an and condition in there to say, and the show menu attribute is true, because if the container has said that we don't want that menu, then we need to make sure it never becomes visible. So what we can do is just use the and condition. So the second condition has to be based upon the attribute, which is show menu. Okay, so both conditions have to be true, that show menu, which is set to true when they hover, and the attribute that says we do want to see the menu has to be true as well. Okay, so if we have a look back in our page, let's just test that, and we should see the menu, that's fine. Now if we go on in here in our page for our top level user info menu, what we can do on our attribute is we can say, actually, you know what, I don't want to show the menu for this particular instance. I just want to show the user details. So when we run that now, there is no menu when we hover. Okay, so I hope so you're getting the how simple and easy this is once you get into the you know the real culture of it. So let's go back. This is all good, we're almost there. But on our component for our menu, which is embedded in our info component, we also have some events, okay? So what that component is exposing to us is to tell us, so when they click the add button, edit button, view button, delete button, our component, which is the menu's container component, knows exactly what's been clicked. We're going to be told when each one is clicked, okay? So what we'll do then, we'll implement the clicked add event. And what we need to do then is simply call our own click event and then pass in the user ID and then just give it the task that's been clicked, in this case add. Okay, so we're receiving the event from the little menu component, and then within this component we're then going to send it back up to the page, so the page will know which user's been clicked and which task has been clicked. So what we can do then is we're going to trigger the click event for the page to see, and then we need to give it some information, which, if you remember, we create an object and we have two properties in the object, which is ID, which is the user, and we also have the task, and the ID needs to come from the user attribute, so user attribute ID, and the task is going to be add because we're responding to the clicked add event, so we can just pop that in there. Okay, that's the output of the task, and that's the information we're going to send back to the container, our page. Okay, so what I will do, I will just implement the edit one for now so that we can see it working. So we do exactly the same thing. I'm going to trigger the click event, and then I'm going to create an object to return back to the container that's listening for the event, and that's going to be ID, and that's going to be gotten from the user's ID attribute. And then we're going to add the task, important to spell it right. We can get rid of that one, and we can simply just say that this is going to be edit. Okay, and then that's what we're going to look at. Okay, so we've now got the click event. So if they just click it directly, then we've got a click event which triggers a click event, but in that case that's just going to pass in the user ID but no task, to let the container know that yes, this was a user that was clicked, but there was no task that was requested. In these ones, we're getting it back from the menu. On the menu, the add icon was clicked, and in this case we're going to say yep, the user ID and also the task that was clicked. So now if we go back to the page and we have a look at our click event, okay, so at the minute we're just receiving the user ID. We also need to receive the task, so we need to create a variable to receive that into. So let's go over to data and variables, and let's call this selected task. Okay, and we will just leave it a blank for now. Okay, so back in our click event, we can then say that we want to set the selected task, and this time we want to grab the task value from the object, from the event object. So this time we're going to say task, okay, and that will get us the task, and then that's put in memory there. Okay, so what we need to do now, if we go back to elements, if you remember, we had a little label here that when we run it, as you click a user, it also clicks on there. Okay, so what we need to do really is to prove that they're actually clicking on each one, which at the minute I think we've just got the edit and the add, so the first and the third one, to make sure that that displays that as well. So okay, so we can see that it's working in terms of when we click the add, it is working in terms of the user ID, so it's still picking it up correctly as we'd expect it to do. Okay, so what we can do then in here is, but what we can do is to say that we want the selected item, selected task, sorry, so that we can put in there the selected task if they've picked it. So let's give that one a go. So let's click on that one. Nope, nothing's happening. Okay, with that one. So what is going on there? and I think what is happening is we've got one click event, and which is getting raised on our component, regardless of whether that's just a straightforward click of the user or whether it's a click off the menu. What is happening, I think, if we go in here, is, yeah, so what's happening is everything is living inside this div, and that's got a click event on it. So what's happening is, and because our component lives in that, even though it's got its own events, because this lives within the container, the containing element, the div or the group in bubble parlance, it's kind of overriding it because that's the one that's getting clicked. So when you click on that event, all that's getting triggered in there is just sending the user ID. Okay, so it's never getting a chance to pick these up. So we probably need to move things around a little bit. So what I'm thinking, because we need to still deal with these, okay, because if we put those in the wrong place, that could be, but then we'd need to move the mouse, enter the mouse leave to the top. Yeah, I think that's what we'll do. Okay, so I'll just drag this out of that div and make it a direct sibling of the component, and move that one up above it. That's it. And what I will do is I will move the mouse enter and mouse leave off of that div. So in other words, the menu is working independently of this div, because what was happening while it was living inside this div, then the click event was overriding anything that this was doing in terms of being able to click the add and the edit. But we still need the mouse enter and mouse leave, so we're going to put those directly on the components. So let's do that. So we've got mouse enter, and what we can do then is to set show menu to be true, and on mouse leave we can then set show menu to be false. Okay, right, so the click menu is still living inside the div. That's if you just click the user but don't click any option on the menu, but the menu now is not living inside that same div, so therefore it won't get overridden by it yet. By putting the mouse enter and mouse leave on the main component, that will still apply to everything that we need it to do. So let's just give that a go. So click this one, let's click the edit. Yep, that displays against there. The add for this user, the edit for this user. So now the task is getting picked up as well as the user ID, so that's working okay. What about if we click directly on the user? No, nothing's happening there. Okay, right, okay, so we're just missing one last little piece of this. We're nearly done. So let's go into here, and we've got our selected task, but obviously it's blank. We need to know about that. So what we can do is we can add a, let's say, an if condition in there. So we can say that if the selected task, okay, does not equal, and then we can say blank. Okay, then the condition that we want is going to be the actual selected task. So in other words, what we want to display in this label is if the selected task isn't empty, then let's go and let's just go full screen with this one. So in other words, if the selected task is not equal to blank, then we want to show our selected task because it's add, edit, etc. Else clicked. Okay. Okay, right. So that's good enough. So all we're saying now is that if there is a selected task, then show that selected task inside the label. If there isn't a selected task, just show clicked, and it'll just show to us what we need to see. So we click that one, yep, just clicked. But if we go and select add, that shows. Or if we want to select edit, that shows as well. So in other words, it's just proving really that when we click on it, we can see that it's just clicked on this, or we can then return that. So in other words, Now that the page knows which user has been clicked and which task has been clicked, it can now take action to show the right dialogue or navigate to a different area of the app or whatever it needs to do. And the point I was trying to make through all of this is simply how you get data in and how you get data out with events, and how Toddle implements that perfectly so that we can use it and we can see how easy it is compared to the way that Bubble did it. There will be, if I was to show this in Bubble, there would be so many more steps and also different ways to do it that perhaps wouldn't be uniform. So that's pretty much it, I think. So I hope you've enjoyed this one. It's been a long one, I know, but I just wanted to show you that this to me is the crux of Toddle. This is what really where it gets its power from. Yes, there's loads of different elements to Toddle. It's a fantastic tool. It perhaps isn't quite there yet in terms of the sheer breadth of features that perhaps something like Bubble gives you, but in terms of what it does give you is extremely powerful. So it's definitely something that you should be looking at and getting into as a viable not just alternative, but an additional skill set for where it can be used. So listen, thanks for watching, thanks for sticking with me. Please like and subscribe. Don't forget all of that malarkey as well. Give me encouragement. If you want me to make more of these, please let me know. Toddle is fairly close to my heart at the minute, and for me something that should be one of the big players in the no-code game, and I'm pretty sure it will be fairly soon. So if you want me to make more of these, please let me know. If you want me to keep making them within the context of Bubble, let me know. If you'd rather me just make pure Toddle videos, just let me know. Obviously the guys at Toddle are doing a great job of that. They've also done a video on components if you want to have a look at that one as well. It's a bit shorter than this one, but my main aim really is to get somebody in a Bubble mindset to start thinking a bit in the Toddle mindset. That's really where it comes from, because people are looking at so many different alternatives these days. While they may have different videos and tutorials, etc., they don't have it coming from thinking from a different tool like Bubble into thinking in the Toddle way. So that's my aim with these, of course, but if you'd rather me just make pure Toddle videos, I'm happy to look at doing that as well. But listen, thanks again for watching and take it easy.